Thanks for having us. Today we're going to talk about data segregation with multi-schema. I'm Hanjie, this is Nick. We work at WeWork. WeWork transforms space, buildings into beautiful space, and WeWork provides the services and the community to our members. So we have a global footprint in 11 countries, 35 cities, and 151 locations so far. And last year we had our biggest expansion so far. We expanded into China, Korea, Australia, which is the region we call APAC, and then also Mexico. And this year we're going to India and Argentina. So this is the gang. Some of them are here. We are a group of developers, software developers, product managers, designers, and digital support. I hope you can tell this picture is not taken at WeWork space. It's kind of dark and low ceiling. So we have a team. Our HQ is only a couple blocks down here, and we have a team in New York and a team in Israel. And we are kind of divided into two big groups: member-facing products and business system. Member-facing product focused on building products that help the member and help them to connect with each other and use WeWork service, and the business system build a system that to power the WeWork business. So growth comes with challenge. International expansion comes with challenge. For every new market that WeWork expand to, not to mention that the building has to be kind of constructed, redesigned, and we have to hire a local team. But for our team, we basically, for the marketing side has to be translated, the member network content has to be localized, and different country has different legal requirements. They have to be met, and different payment method has to be enabled. But those are not the problems we're going to talk about today. Today we're going to talk about a challenge that in one of our core business system, and oh, this is only excuse me. This is part of our expansion list. This is 1/3 of it. These are all the things that we have to do. But today we're going to focus on data segregation in one of our core business system. Before I dive into why we need to do that and how we did it, this is a little bit overview and background of that system. So the core business system, you can see a bunch of different applications talk to it. The marketing side gets the inventory from this business system, and the sales tools that our community managers in every building they use to sell our space, and the member network members uses used to connect with each other, and also they have self-service service. They have self-service service that they can interact with this business system, and downstream there's the ERP that we do all the reconciliation. So this is the background, and this business system has a couple of components in there: roles and permissions, and it owns our inventory, and it manages the membership cycle and the billing and promotion engine. So early on, we built the permissions into the system. So you can imagine there are different roles at WeWork, right? There are community managers. They run the building, and they can perform certain sales functions, and they can do things that a community manager can do. But a community manager cannot say upload a bunch of inventory to our system. That's what the finance department and or the sales department does. So we have those roles and permissions in our system to kind of to have the check and balance on what you can do and what you cannot. But the international expansion brings a challenge. Now we not only have the community managers in US, in Europe, we also have community managers in many markets, in China, in Korea, and in other markets as well. So does that mean that we are going to keep adding roles and permissions to it? Then now we're going to not only have the CM role, we have the China CM role, US CM role, US community manager role. Adding. It seems like we need something, another layer of data segregation on top of the roles and permissions. So we consider a bunch of we consider a lot of like different options that we can achieve the segregation. In our case, by market. But we're going to focus on the solution that we picked, which is use Postgres schema to achieve data segregation. Usually, every database has a bunch of tables in it, obviously. But Postgres has this feature called, by default, has this feature called schema, and all the tables belong to this public schema. That's by default. That's out of the box. And the schema is basically a namespace, which in turn contains tables. And before you execute a query, you can set a search path, and then all the query you execute is within that schema. So in our case, we have different type of tables, right? Accounts, credits, payment profiles, invoices, and payments. But not all of them need to be segregated. For example, the accounts, like if you have one account at WeWork, you should not be have separate accounts, and you should only have one account. And under that account, you can have invoices in this market, you have invoices in that market. But the point here being, some of the data need to be segregated, but some of them are meant to be shared. So this is how we did it. We on top of the public schema, we created, in our case, right now we have two other schema, APAC for Asia Pacific and the rest of the world, and all the sensitive data goes into like individual schemas. For example, if I'm a member of WeWork and I have offices in New York and I have offices in, let's say, Shanghai, and I will have my membership, I will have my China invoices, the China payments belong to the APAC schema, and my invoices and payments will belong, my US invoices and payments will belong to the rest of the world schema. But I will have one account in the public schema, and I have a pool of credits that I can use across all WeWork locations, no matter you're in Asia or in US. So that's what we did. We picked Postgres schema, for a couple of reasons. Number one, this is the easiest way for us to achieve logical data segregation. And in our scenario, we don't need total isolation of the data. We need some data to be shared and some data to be segregated. And because the data segregation is on the database level, it's a little bit fault tolerant. It's not like we need to implement nasty roles and permissions and on the application layer in the controller. And we didn't pick the option to separate the database into multiple databases. It's easier for DevOps to manage. And last but not least, because all the changes are kind of contained within the system and it's not multiple databases, there are very little change. The external systems don't need like a lot of the knowledge of like what schema or like what data you are getting from. You just need to know, hey, this account and these are all the information related to that account. So now I'm going to hand off to Nick. He's going to tell you about some of the challenges we had when implementing Postgres schema.
Yeah. So important part is that we are all developers, or some people may not be developers, but this was developed for developers. The idea is that none of the users need to care, and we want the majority of our developers to stay happy. Because if it is really painful for developers, in which case you've solved one problem, oh, I don't need as many roles, and I've added double the amount of work that every single one of my developers to do, which is just not fun or acceptable. So one of the ways that we handle this is we actually made it so that you're only aware of schema, generally speaking, within the controllers and rate tasks. That's all handled by middleware, and we added a bunch of helper methods to handle that. So if you're in a service, or you're in a model, or anywhere else in your libraries, you're only interacting within your own personal schema or the public schema, because the public schema is always accessible. So this is generally speaking, this is how Rails works. You got your controller, and you go and talk to your bunch of models and services, and a bunch of things happen. So the problem is we need to know where to go. So anytime you actually hit our app, either through the API or through the UI, you actually hit the schema middleware, which detects what tenant you should be in, which means that the developer most of the time doesn't ever actually have to interact with any of the utilities that we built, which means that your controllers stay pretty clean. Your services, obviously, nothing basically changes under the hood for your services, your models. So rather than having to change everything, you only had to change a small amount. And then underneath, it's all in the appropriate schema. So, how? Simple methods. Basically, these are the only three things that you ever need to use in our system if you need to talk to a specific tenant. You need to switch. You make an active choice. I need to switch to a particular schema. You need to execute in a particular schema, or you need to aggregate from all the schemas. So once you need to do this, once you have these, the developer goes, all right, for this particular data, because I guess customers want us to be able to see all their invoices, you're able to grab it from all of them using the aggregate from all tenants. One really fun adventure is that ActiveRecord is very helpful and it caches results. So when you use something like execute in all tenants or aggregate in all tenants, you have to make sure that anything that's in the public schema that you haven't found, you have to hit reload on it so that way it doesn't cache the results of your queries. Because otherwise you're going to find that it tries to execute the exact same action on the APAC twice and then it can't save it actually because you're now in the rest of the world. Fun adventures. First thing, database. Now we need to interact with our database. You got your migrations. This sounds like it should be a really huge pain point. The good news is through a utility and the gem that we use, it's not. Literally all you have to do in our migrations is you add this single line to your up method. And what this does is it generates a unique sequence across all of your tenants because each migration is run in individual tenants. So the reason is that we use this helpful gem called apartment. We use it. It has a lot of helpers. It's basically what does most of the legwork for us. This is the wonderful thing about Rails, is that there's a gem out there for doing practically whatever it is that you want to do. It also supports, by the way, tenanting by subdomain if you're dealing with a ton of clients, the like. We're just using a single system, so we don't have that. One really nasty caveat, though, is it doesn't support delayed job. Everything must be in Sidekick, which for us was actually in some ways a plus because that forced us to get rid of all our legacy delayed job stuff. We were about half and half, and this forced us to go entirely over to Sidekick, except for when we forgot about it. So that leads me to testing must be miserable. So the good news is, for the most part, it's not. We just added this to our RSpec. We say that unless you're explicitly testing, I want this to be able to aggregate from all the tenants or something like that, you just say, I probably want to be in the rest of the world tenant, which is where most of our data lives. So this, you put this in the year before, you put this in the year after, you're happy. Legacy endpoints. Like we said earlier, one of the important things is that we basically only wanted to modify a single system. Even though that there's basically tens of systems that are talking to the system, we wanted none of their things to change. So which means that we needed cross-tenant views. And this is, if you guys have ever done views in Rails, you know that it's not fun. ActiveRecord does not want to do views. For example, and we need this because a lot of our legacy endpoints did things like, oh, I want to update this reservation, here's its ID. That's a pretty natural thing to do, especially in a RESTful world. Unfortunately, it doesn't really work that way when we need to figure out which of the three schemas this might be from, or cross, I need this ID, oh, it might be a chair, it might be an office, stuff like that becomes a little problematic. By the way, search path only ever returns from a single schema, so you can run into fun adventures there. Migrations, again, don't play nice. I'm going to show this next slide only briefly because it's hideous. And this is what we have to do to handle all of these views. So that does not look pretty. and I highly recommend not doing this. So the good news is that, so as I said earlier, this is how the happy path. So this is what we have to do, is that now we get requests into the controller. It looks in the all view to match the ID. It then goes to the schema middleware and then goes down the happy path. So it's just a little bit of an added pain. So further adventures, these are a couple other things, like the reload earlier. This is a very famous quote that everybody loves. Everybody has a testing environment. Some people are lucky enough to have a totally separate environment to run production in. So for us, we actually had it the reverse. So the problem is that we had an entirely separate environment to run our testing in. So we use, most of our stuff is hosted on Heroku, but our production database is actually on Amazon RDS. And the permissions for RDS, aka the stuff you can go in to migrate, create all these schemas, is different. So that was a lot of not fun. We actually had to roll back production. Good times. The other fun thing is that we have a month-long billing cycle, which means that sometimes certain issues don't show up immediately. And these are just some resources that we basically use to base all of our work on. The bottom one is the final commit of putting this live. You'll notice that it is 160 files changed. Not fun. And we actually crashed GitHub loading the page once on that PR, because that's also 179 commits. Important, this is at every single Rails thing. We're hiring. Sorry, Betterment. We have an engineering blog, engineering.wework.com. We have an apply. And that's all from us. Thank you. So, any questions?
What could be down this path as opposed to just adding a regions table and using more universal to get you to access control?
Yeah. So what led us to do this versus a foreign like a table that says these are all our regions and then you have a foreign access? So Hanjie can speak a little better to this. I did mostly handle the implementation. So do you have a
So because we didn't really want to touch on the service layer, on the models and the business logic in the controller. Like imagine if we were to do that, basically every time when we execute a query, you'll be able to say, hey, now you have to add an extra where query to pick, hey, where does this data from? That's why we didn't really want to go into the service and the model to actually touch the business logic, and we want to have it like very abstract on the top, on the controller and in the middleware. So as soon as the request comes in, and based on whoever's performing the action, and to route you to the right place. So even though that was a lot of changes, the changes were actually mostly like in the before action where, hey, you basically have to select the right tenant, and that's just based on very simple roles to do.
It's a one-time maintenance as well. We had to do a lot of work to do this. Obviously, it was a multi-month work, but it was still basically a one-time change, whereas the long-term developer overhead is very minimal.
So, I mean, wouldn't the controller layer be the right place to do that reversal? Like, basically, if I were going to model this in a relational way, I would have the controller go current user dot regions dot properties dot find, right? And that would be how I would do the access control. The reversal, it'd all be in the controller, and then from a business logic perspective, there'd be no region awareness necessary. So, like, how is that?
You'd have to limit the search path somehow. The issue is like in the services, you'd have to have in the back of your head maybe have to have I can only find things in these regions added onto all your queries basically.
But that should be in the controller, right? The controller should be locating the resource that you're operating on. And
generally speaking, well, the service. I mean, depends on I guess where you are in the fat model, fat service, fat controller, and so on and so forth. But generally speaking, a lot of that logic is handled in our services.
Okay, so your access control is sort of like evenly spread throughout your service layer.
Yep. Kind of.
Yes. Yep.
Like the reason that I want to segregate things would be related to like permissions or like scaling or like what other benefits are you getting from this outside of organizing data in a different way?
So I will repeat the question. The question is, it doesn't really look like a segregation. It seems like organizing the data in a better way, which is true. Schema, like we use schema. Schema is basically a logic grouping of data. And the reason we picked this way was because the way right now the data will kind of be segregated by market, right? And for us, the data it will be very easy to actually, for most of the cases that as a person working in this region, you only need the data for your region, and in some cases you need the data from to get across all the regions. So yes, it's actually for us mostly for like a logic grouping, but also for us for the sensitive financial data. For example, for the sensitive financial data, we don't want everyone to be able to see everything in the system. Now, like only for example, if I were a CM in China or like in I wouldn't be able to access the data based on my role. I wouldn't be able to access the data from other regions. That's mostly for the protection. Yeah. Right. Right. For example, this year we're expanding into India, and for India we're going to create a separate schema for India, and all the India data is going to go into that schema. The same box, the same database, but underneath it will be public, APAC, rest of the world, India, and in the future if we decide to have more tenants, basically more schema, we can do that as well.
Yeah, so I saw that you have a I was just wondering if you can understand this idea of privacy law states that only Germans processing your German secrets. This is a really good solution to switch out the online database.
Yeah, can you repeat the question a little? I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch.
Sure. So the sort of crux of it, right, is the German privacy law states that.
Oh, yeah.
Really only and like it seems like you almost got a solution.
So, yeah, actually, if you implement this using, I guess this can be the last question. If you implement this with anything but Postgres. Oh, sorry, yeah. This solves German privacy law. His point is that you could use this to solve like EU privacy law as opposed to, and I guess Britain needs its own in the future. This is not intended towards that direction. This is intended for our data protection. So yeah, you could use something like this, and particularly if you actually use a non-Postgres solution, the default for apartment is actually underneath that you create a separate database. And it says, oh, you want to talk to this tenant, go talk to this database, and it handles all that logic for you. So in which case you could have your database hosted in Germany, your database hosted in the US, and so on and so forth. For us, that's not really the concern. That's above my pay grade. Why it's not really the concern. But basically, yeah, you could use this same gem to solve that sort of problem. So, yeah.
Yeah. So I was curious, why is region the right dimension to do this split, and is that rest of the world real? Or if it is, why are some regions special and deserve their own versus just get lumped in with the rest of the world?
So the question is, why are we breaking it down by region? And basically the answer is due to the nature of how we're entering into those regions. So we have some legal details of how we're going into India, the legal, like the billing, the people that we're using to bill in China are different than the ones out in the rest of the world, and we don't want them to be able to go through and everything. So it's not a concern. The rest of the world doesn't need to worry about, they can go in and look at all these different things, but we don't want those people in those regions because it's not necessarily WeWork employees, it's an external contractor in some cases, so we don't want them to be able to just go and grab everything. Does that make sense? Anything else? All right. Thank you, guys.